I'll never forget the morning I discovered them. Hundreds of my fish drifting lifeless on the lake's surface, their silver scales catching the sunrise like a field of fallen stars. In that instant, I knew someone had just made the worst decision of their life. A chill ran through my fingers. This lake had belonged to my family for 3 generations. 40 acres of clear, spring-fed water stocked with bass and catfish my grandfather had tended like kin. I dropped to one knee, reaching into the shallows to touch one of the bodies. That's when the stench hit. Me, chemical, sharp, unnatural. Someone had poisoned the water. Slowly, I rose, jaw clenched, eyes fixed across the lake at the row of new homes perched on the ridge. The Silverbrook Heights development, built 2 years ago. They'd argued with me over boundaries, complained about my night fishing, and sent their HOA letters claiming my dock was an eyesore that dragged down their property values. But this was beyond that. This was a declaration of war. I pulled out my phone, photographing every floating carcass. I could see before calling the county's environmental office. The woman on the other end sounded detached until I mentioned contamination. "Sir, that's a serious claim. Could it be a natural die-off?" she asked. "Natural die-offs don't smell like bleach and bug killer," I said flatly. She promised to send someone within 48 hours. I ended the call and stared out at the ruined water. Hearing my grandfather's voice in memory, I was 10 years old, holding a fishing rod for the first time as he said, "This water's alive, boy. You protect it and it'll protect you." Someone had killed it, and I was going to find out who. By noon, I had circled the entire shoreline. On the eastern edge, where my property met the runoff ditch from the development, I found it. A length of PVC pipe was half buried in the reeds, oozing a faint greenish film into the water. It connected to something beyond the fence line. I snapped more photos, scooped a bit of the residue into a glass jar, and then did what any rational person would call a bad idea. I followed the line. I climbed the fence, shoved through the brush, and ended up behind the neighborhood's so-called wellness pavilion, their polished title, for what was basically a pool area and a maintenance shed. The pipe snaked straight from a massive holding tank behind the shed, its label reading algae suppressant, industrial use only. My guts sank. They'd been flushing chemical runoff and pool waste straight into the drainage that fed my lake. Footsteps crunched on gravel. I crouched low behind a hedge. 2 men in matching polos bearing the Ridgeview HOA logo strolled past, one carrying a clipboard. "Did Walker sign off on the extra dosage?" one asked. The other smirked. "He signed off on fixing our little fishing. Nuisance. That guy's been ignoring our letters for months. This'll shut him up." My knuckles went white, but I stayed still. Proof mattered more than a confrontation. Once they were gone, I documented everything. The tank, the connections, the warning labels, even a laminated maintenance order taped to the shed door. Storm runoff flush, double application approved by HOA President L. Walker. I climbed back over the fence and headed home, my pulse still pounding. But I didn't call the environmental office again, not yet. Something my grandfather once told me kept echoing in my mind about the natural springs beneath the land. I dug out the old property survey from 1987, the one mapping the underground water flow. And that's when I saw it. The springs feeding my lake didn't end on my land. They kept running underground, veering northeast, straight beneath the Silverbrook Heights subdivision. According to the geological maps attached to the old survey, those springs weren't just decorative. They were the main groundwater source for the entire region, which meant the Silverbrook developers had drilled their wells right into the same aquifer feeding my lake. I leaned back in my chair, everything clicking into place. They'd tainted my lake to shut me up about fishing. But in doing so, they'd poisoned their own water. I grabbed my phone and called a friend from college, a hydrologist at the state university. "Evan, I need a favor. Can you run a contamination test and trace the source?" He agreed and said he could get results within 24 hours. That afternoon, I drove to his lab with 3 samples. One from my lake, one from the drainage pipe, and one from a garden spigot at the edge of the HOA property. When Evan called the next day, his tone was tense. "Where exactly did you collect these?" he asked. "From my land and from the neighborhood next door," I replied. He exhaled. "The lake water's loaded with copper, sulfate and quaternary ammonia, both industrial-grade algicides. But here's the kicker. The hose sample has trace amounts of the same stuff. Not enough to make people sick yet, but if this keeps up, their drinking water's done for within months. I asked him to document everything. Within an hour, an email arrived. A detailed report with charts, chemical readings, and recommendations for immediate cleanup. Now I had proof, undeniable and solid. I dialed the county environmental office again. This time, I didn't get the board receptionist. I asked to speak with the director and told him I had proof of illegal chemical dumping contaminating a shared water source. He told me to send everything I had, so I did. Every file, every photo. Then I forwarded the same packet to the State Department of Environmental Quality. And just to make sure no one could claim ignorance, I printed a hard copy of Evan's report, drove to the Silverbrook Heights HOA office, and handed it to the receptionist. "Make sure Mr. Walker gets this," I said. "It's about your water." She blinked in confusion but accepted the envelope. I left before she could ask anything else. 3 days later, my phone rang. "This is Leonard Walker," the caller said. Smooth and polished, the kind of voice used to boardrooms and negotiations. "I understand there's been some misunderstanding regarding runoff and water quality. I'd like to meet to resolve this." "No misunderstanding," I said flatly. "Your people dumped toxins into my lake, and in doing so, into your own drinking water." Silence stretched for a few beats. "I'm sure we can reach an arrangement," he said finally. "Perhaps a financial settlement for your losses. We're prepared to be generous." I let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "I don't want your money. Mr. Walker, I want you to stop poisoning the watershed, and I want it on record that you knew this was happening." Another pause, longer this time. "I think you're exaggerating," he said carefully. "Our environmental team assured us your contractors broke state and federal clean water laws," I cut in. "The DQ and EPA are already on it. You've got bigger problems than dead fish." The call ended abruptly. That evening, I watched trucks roll up to the HOA's maintenance lot. Men in hazmat suits, hauling out chemical tanks, sealing the runoff lines. By week's end, the EPA had filed a formal violation notice against the Silverbrook Heights HOA, fines totaling $60,000. They were also ordered to install a proper filtration system and conduct monthly water testing for the next 5 years. But the real blow came a month later, when the subdivision's wells tested positive for contamination. The county issued a do-not-drink advisory, and suddenly every homeowner in Silverbrook Heights was getting bottled water deliveries, while the HOA scrambled to clean up their own disaster. Walker tried to pin the blame on the maintenance crew, the county, even me, but the maintenance order bearing his signature was already sitting in the EPA's files. He stepped down 2 weeks later. As for my lake, it took 6 long months, but the water healed. I restocked it with fingerlings, just the way my grandfather used to. By the next spring, I pulled in a 4-pound base right off the same dock they once called an eyesore. I had it mounted, and beneath it, I added a small plaque with my grandfather's words. "Poison the water you depend on, and you'll die of your own thirst." People can get so blinded by spite that they forget. We're all drinking from the same stream. And when the current turns foul, they're the first to drown.